I'm Michael Krasny, and I welcome you to another episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, a weekly podcast of deep dive interviews. You can become a member of this podcast simply by going to graymatter.show, and that's gray with an E. We cover a wide range of timely and intellectually engaging topics, distinguished, we like to believe, because it's true, by high-level content and technical excellence. In this episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, our guest is journalist, Mideast analyst, and Stanford lecturer in communications, Janine Zacharia. A graduate of Middlebury College and a New York native, she was Jerusalem bureau chief for the Washington Post, as well as Washington bureau chief for the Jerusalem Post and Jerusalem correspondent for Reuters. And she served as chief diplomatic correspondent for Bloomberg News. A former Knight Fellow at Stanford, she's written for the San Francisco Chronicle and Slate.com. And I'm pleased to welcome Janine Zacharia back to this podcast, Gray Matter with Michael Krasny. And welcome, Janine.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Great to have you with us. And I want to talk first with you about the shifting sands. I mean, it's a new Middle East, really, isn't it?
Well, I don't know how much the Middle East is new, but certainly the way the U.S. is prioritizing things.
Precisely what I mean.
Yes. Well, no, and not to undersell the changes that are happening there. Of course, if we just start maybe the date of the changes to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas onslaught massacre in Israel, that really kicked off such a wave of implications that I don't even think Hamas themselves anticipated. Of course, we have now more than 20 months of war going on between Israel and Hamas. You have, of course, in the interim, the ouster of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. You have...
no more sanctions against Syria.
Right, the U.S. dropping sanctions, and I think it's worth spending a moment on what that could lead to, because there may be something positive, certainly very positive there, if people recall sort of the Syrian refugee crisis that was hitting the borders of Greece and, people drowning in the Mediterranean, and, if we could get to a more moderate Syria, that would be sort of a game changer, certainly when it comes to resolving crises along the Israel-Lebanon border as well. We could talk a bit about that. And then you've got really a shift in terms of the Gulf playing, I would say, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates playing a bigger role than, say, the more conventional Middle East powers used to, like Egypt. Like, whoever talks about Egypt anymore? Egypt's in a financial crisis. They've been nowhere really in the conversations with regarding to putting an end to the Israel-Hamas war, even though, of course, Gaza and Egypt have their own border. And Egypt
forgive me, except for the fact that Egypt has been pretty much not allowing Palestinians to come into their country. And there's been an attempt, at least, some attempt to get Palestinians to go to Egypt or Jordan or whatever by the Trump administration, it seems.
Well, yeah, and in terms of being a blockade, that is true. In terms of being a peacemaker or a positive ally, that is less clear to me. I agree with you, Michael, 100% that earlier in the war, there should have been more pressure on Egypt to allow Palestinians who wanted to evacuate with their families to allow them to go, at least temporarily, and that we did not see that. But a couple. But the other two big players, of course, so among the Gulfies are Saudi Arabia, which not too long ago, their leader Mohammed bin Salman was largely ostracized and condemned throughout the world after the murder of Washington Post columnist and prominent Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi, which people may remember was murdered in a very brutal way in a Saudi consulate in Turkey not too long ago. And now you have the U.S. president just ecstatic to be welcomed in Saudi Arabia just last week or the week before. And then there's the big question right now of what's happening with Iran. And what's going to happen in terms of negotiations on the nuclear program there remains somewhat unclear to me.
Well, at this point, it seems like the United States is talking to Iran, and that doesn't necessarily thrill Bibi Netanyahu. In fact, curious to get your response where Israel fits into this new Middle East picture, because I think it is a new picture in some respects. But before we get to that, let me talk with you about Qatar, because that's at the center of this with a $400 million jet and all the rest of it, and what it all means in terms of deals that are being made. I mean, the previous deals were to the benefit of Trump's son-in-law. Now it seems to be his biological sons and him personally. And I'm just wondering, for example, what may have been done behind the scenes to get a young man from Tenafly, New Jersey, who was being held the last American hostage, out and returned to his family. Qatar has been a place of refuge for Hamas. It's been a place that's gotten a great deal of money from, a great deal of money has gone there into Hamas and so forth. And it seems like there are back channels here now, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, there's front channels too. I mean, Qatar obviously has a lot of wealth, and I mean, when it comes to Qatar, they have played in sort of an unusual role here because sometimes they do seem to have influence with Hamas. In the example that you just gave of getting Adan Alexander, the American-Israeli hostage, released, and sometimes they seem unable to exercise their influence or perhaps unwilling. I don't know. They have been the host of the negotiations, the mediator between Israel and Hamas on getting the remaining estimated 20 living hostages out who have been held for more than 60 days there, and is really is key, I think, very key to be putting an end to the hostilities that we see. And then, it's just not clear to me sometimes. And they, of course, for years, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, they've hosted Hamas leaders. And now they've really just given this gift, or, I mean, really, what do you call it? A bribe of some kind. I don't know what you call it. When this $400 million jet to President Trump and the U.S. Air Force to use as Air Force One. I mean, I'm still trying to get my head around what that all means and how that's even happening. As someone who has traveled on Air Force One and has learned about the sophisticated technology that plane has, I mean, it's just incredible.
It's going to take an extraordinary amount of money just to find out if there's anything bugging
Well, of
that
course,
plane.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's just imagine if President Biden had accepted a $400 million plane from the Qataris, what would be happening right now?
Well, right now, all they're doing is talking about his cognitive deficiencies. There's this Jake Tapper's book, which was co-written and so forth. I don't want to. I guess I just did give it a plug inadvertently. But Netanyahu is clearly upset, I imagine, by this. He's been sort of sidelined, and when he was talking to Trump when he was here in the United States, there were those who said that Trump was talking not necessarily about Israel. He was going on about other things. At least that's according to anonymous sources that I read. And Netanyahu is sort of in a pariah state now. I mean, everybody is looking at Israel as a place that is starving out Gazans, and the word genocide is thrown around promiscuously. I mean, Israel is coming under great fire, and here's this right-wing government that's still in control of Israel with the leader wanting to keep out of prison.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been covering Prime Minister Netanyahu since 1996 when he defeated Shimon Peres in a surprise election. So that's, I guess, close to 30 years now. And he is an incredibly smart politician. And the primary concern for him always is staying in power. So I think that's the prism through which it is best to analyze whatever moves he is taking. So...
Or staying out of prison as well.
And staying out of, and then now in the last decade, as he faces multiple inquiries, investigations. I mean, there was a moment not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, where he was testifying in one corruption trial, and then he had to be rushed to another courthouse to give testimony or be a witness or whatever it's called technically in the judicial system in another case involving Qatari influence with some of his allies, something they're calling Qatar Gate there. I don't think we need to explore that right now, but it's, he's wrapped up in, yes, his staying out of prison, keeping his coalition together to make sure he doesn't go to prison so he can remain in power, because he has a certain amount of immunity so long as he remains prime minister. And it's hard to see the extension of this bombing campaign as much more than that at this point, given that you've had more than 52,000 Palestinians killed. You have Israel, as you mentioned, increasingly a pariah state with some of the top Western allies, the British, the French, and the Canadians, saying they're going to take another look at their trade relations with Israel. It's extraordinary how much damage this has done to Israel's standing in the world.
It's also a right-wing government that I've always suspected may want not only to reoccupy Gaza, but take over the West Bank.
Yeah, they've made no secret of that. And this is a coalition made up of people who support Greater Israel, Israeli extension of Israeli sovereignty across the West Bank and Gaza, who opposed the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005 under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, when he was at that time doing unilateral withdrawals from the territory. I covered that when I was with Bloomberg News, and you had people who support this coalition like literally hanging onto the roof of their houses. They had to be evacuated by Israeli soldiers. So some 7,000 or so Jewish settlers at the time. So they would like nothing more than to resettle the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And really, it's hard to see where this is all going. I mean, there is, I would say, a growing number of Israelis who are protesting the continuation of the war, who are now beginning to hold up signs of Gazan children, Palestinian children who have been killed in Israeli strikes and operations. But there's a bit of schizophrenia also in the country, it seems, at this point, in terms of whether or not to actually continue the war until the objectives are achieved, which, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, is to rid the Strip of Hamas control and to bring the hostages back, or to just stop it right now, rescue the 20 remaining hostages, and deal with the Hamas question later. So it's very interesting to see where that's going to go, because after the act, I mean, Israelis have not yet stopped. They can't mourn or grieve October 7th, the 1,300 people who were murdered and killed, until those hostages are released. And the another extraordinary thing that has happened is Israel has not begun any official government inquiry into that incredible security failure and intelligence failure. Usually there's a government inquiry, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is blocking that.
Well, it was on his watch, and he was spending most of his time trying to tend to the West Bank as opposed to thinking about what might have been danger coming from Hamas. And I mean, in the wake of all this terror and all this horror that we have witnessed, including a couple of young people just murdered the other day from when this podcast is being recorded. And by the way, that's kind of, you think about that in the attempt to burn down Josh Shapiro's governor's mansion and so forth. It's really pretty chilling. And it just highlights to some extent how things have moved in ways that are really quite grim. But the hostages, in terms of release, as you say, that seems to be ignored now. I mean, what they're doing is just bombing and starving.
Yeah, it's hard to see the strategic or even tactical impact that will have. I don't know that, I mean, I don't even know if Israel wants to reoccupy the entire Gaza Strip and hold it. I don't know that they have the manpower to do that. I mean, they have put reservist soldiers, people who work, say, in the top of Israeli tech companies, in multiple deployments right now. This is now the longest war in Israel's history. And they are sending people back to the Gaza Strip who are like suffering from PTSD, and I don't even know if they can achieve it. So the bombing, the continued...
Well, they can get the Haredis, they could maybe
Yeah,
achieve
and right. And then you've got a large portion of Israeli society who was supposed to be serving and be drafted, and somehow that's not happening either. The ultra-Orthodox, as you mentioned. So and I think that we're maybe at an inflection point with this, because the tolerance, the international community tolerances, as I mentioned, domestic Israeli opinion tolerance for this kind of campaign of bombing is not going to be sustainable.
And there's not going to be a deal with the Saudis. I always thought that the October 7th massacre had a lot to do with keeping any kind of rapprochement between Israel and the Saudis from happening, and it succeeded now.
Well, I mean, let's see what happens. I think that if the Saudis were to join what President Trump, and Jared Kushner negotiated in his first term called the Abraham Accords, that would be a game changer. But I don't see that happening, certainly not while this continues, this kind of scale of killing without any end in sight, really. I don't see how the Saudis would do any kind of deal with Israel. So yes, in that sense, and the Wall Street Journal did have a piece recently sort of proving that was part of the motivation for Hamas to launch the attack, to thwart that, because they thought that the Palestinian issue would be forgotten. But now, I mean, the ripple effects, I mean, from everything that you saw, obviously the casualties in Israel, now the enormous casualties in Gaza, and the protests are across the U.S. Everything. I mean, it's all stems from that event.
There's some questions coming in, which I'd like to bring in, and I want to talk with you about a number of other things as well. We're focusing on the Middle East. There's so much to talk about there, but I also, in your role as communications professor, want to get some thoughts from you. This is a question from Bill Kemper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks for the question, Bill. He wants to know, what is one underreported story in the Middle East today that you believe deserves far more attention?
Oh, I love that question, because I'm teaching foreign correspondence right now. And the goal of the class for the students is they have to tell an underreported story from anywhere around the globe using all the reporting tools available to us. I don't care if they do a straight narrative, a video, a podcast, a TikTok series, an op-ed, and make it resonate with their peers. Well, there's a lot of them right now, actually, right? Because everything is so singularly focused on Israel's campaign in the Gaza Strip that I think, I think that there needs to be a deeper look. First of all, what's happening in Yemen. We have the Houthi attacks, the Houthis sect that is still launching missiles. Like, what is actually happening in Yemen? I think in Iran, we have a fluctuating focus on domestically what's happening inside Iran. There was a moment, I mean, it was now a year or so ago, or 2 years, where a lot of people in the Iranian exile were really hopeful that the regime, the Ayatollah, would be toppled, whatever happened there. Lebanon, we never get a word from Lebanon. Egypt, well, what's happening with Egypt? I mean, there are so many countries that are underreported right now that I think could merit more coverage. And we saw this in the first Trump term, and this is not the only reason this happened. There's a lot of reasons. There's fewer foreign correspondents amid cutbacks in newsrooms. You can't staff as many newsrooms around the globe. But President Trump sets the agenda for the day. And a lot of other important stories, not only from the Middle East, but from around the world, just don't get the attention they deserve.
Trump has made a deal with the Houthis, hasn't he? Pretty much.
He said so, but
yeah.
I don't really see it. It's not true. I mean, they're still launching missiles at Israel. He said they were going to stop shooting missiles, and they still are. So I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about there.
Well, maybe it's Israel that's being excluded from this deal. I mean, in terms of...
Oh, right. I guess he's only concerned if they're not going to hit U.S. ships. That's true.
Or European ships, maybe, indeed.
Let's take a cautious wait-and-see approach to that quote-unquote deal.
I wonder, in fact, how it's not only the deals that Trump's making with the Saudis and with the Qatari government and so forth, but also, they're talking about him sidelining Netanyahu in Israel. And part of that is he doesn't necessarily see them as the asset in terms of his personal fortunes, but also it's fairly apparent to me, at least, that he wanted that evangelical support, which was even stronger for Israel than it is among American Jews. And he he loves his evangelicals, just like he loves the people who are in the insurrection, but he doesn't necessarily feel that they're going to be necessary politically as much as they were.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu can count on President Trump to have, for just in general. Like, I mean, who can, though, actually? I mean, everything is so transactional. I think what you said is very important. Why is he so excited about the Gulf? One, because they literally have a king, right? He likes the king model. But more importantly, they're investing in his properties, right? They're opening new properties. So it is everything with him is very transactional. And you're right. I mean, Israel, what are they, he had that sort of, I don't know if he was serious about it. Remember a few weeks ago when he was saying it's going to develop Gaza with his hotels, and he was quite serious about it, but then he moves on from that. I mean, this is not the kind of relationship that Israel is accustomed to with the U.S. president. But at the moment, the one thing that Netanyahu needs is sort of a green light to continue, from his perspective, whatever he wants in Gaza. And President Trump, he says they need to wrap it up, but he doesn't. There's no sustained pressure. If the United States stops supplying weapons to Israel, then that's, where Netanyahu is going to have a problem. But at the moment, if he's not paying attention, sometimes that's better for Netanyahu.
Well, I always said that he wanted to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and that may have been the reason why he was so enamored of Putin, aside from the fact that Putin is the kind of autocrat he'd like to be. But, I'm also struck by the fact that he wants to build hotels now in the Gulf, and probably will.
Yeah, and I don't know, where the ethics people are in all this. Are you allowed to do this? Be the president, take a $400 million plane, sign crypto deals, sign real estate deals with people that you have to manage our diplomatic relations with? I mean, the whole thing is, we're in uncharted territory here.
Well, yeah, I've mentioned before, listening to Fox News and hearing Trump selling Trump watches is all revelatory in my mind of where we are. I mean, we never would have been there in any previous presidency, but that's where we are.
That's where we are.
Sharon Liebert from Tampa, Florida wants to know, why are Arab states so resistant to Palestinian refugees? We were talking about this with Egypt. She says it seems like it would have saved thousands of innocent lives.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, but, there's just this feeling of, early in the war, this is something I was saying a lot, at least let the women and children out of there. They were being moved from corner to corner of this small area in Gaza, and really no place was safe. And so, I mean, you had the Israeli military trying to fight a war against Hamas militants in hospitals where there were preemie babies, right? And so it was ridiculous. But the idea that the Palestinians would be leaving territory again was too much in terms of resonating with the vision of what they call the Nakba, or the great catastrophe of from the Palestinian perspective, of the creation of the state of Israel in 1948, when you had mass populations moving out of what is now Israel. And the Arab states have had a tough time with it sheltering Palestinian refugees over the decades, and they felt it would be a destabilizing force and that it wouldn't be temporary. One of the ideas that had been mulled was an area in the Egyptian Sinai adjacent to Gaza, and Egypt just wouldn't do it. And I thought that, at least in a humanitarian sense, creating an enclave right nearby certainly would have saved a lot of lives. And I think that's just a failure of diplomacy.
I'm getting questions now about journalism, so maybe it's time for us to shift, because actually I did want to ask you about something I know you've been, I don't know what the correct word is here, engrossed, obsessed about.
Probably obsessed. Yeah.
Obsessed is a good word to use, maybe. How do we restore respect for fact-based journalism is really what you've been about now, and what you have taken on as a kind of crusade and mission, and it's a very important one, to put it mildly, where I'm concerned, where you're concerned. So what ideas are percolating in your head and heart?
Yeah. So really fundamentally, and I have two big posters in my office here at Stanford, Michael. One is this classic Visit Palestine poster. It's actually was from 1936. It was a pre-state Zionist poster, but now it's also, you see it in Palestinian coffee shops in East Jerusalem, and it's a beautiful image of Jerusalem. I have another one from the 1940s, which is Know the Facts. And it's a person pulling their hair out with propaganda and all these different things, right? They don't know what to believe. And so my mind each day goes between these two areas. But I am very convinced that we will not get out of our current morass unless we restore respect for credible fact-based news. And we're living in this kind of interesting moment where we have unprecedented access to information. If I want to read right now about what's going on in Kenya, I can do it in a second. But people are struggling in an unprecedented way to know what's true, what's not, what to believe. They're bombarded. So a couple of things. One is, my core thesis is that I started teaching at Stanford 14 years ago. And for a long time, it was okay. It was enough to teach 15 to 18 students every quarter. What is news? How do you do an interview? How do you verify information? How do you pitch a story? How do you write clearly? How do you, develop relations, trust? Now, I think it's a democratic national imperative. It's a national imperative for sustaining our democracy for everybody in the country to know those lessons. So I am creating a digital version of my what's called Com 104, reporting, writing, and understanding in the news class, to reach thousands of high school students around the country. I'm working very hard on that right now. I'm pushing initiatives where people with a couple of different newsrooms, particularly I really want to focus on counties where they went for President Obama and then they shifted to President Trump, that are maybe now consuming different kinds of news sources. I want to partner with newsrooms to have people in the communities pitch their story ideas, and then some of them get invited into the newsroom to meet editors to actually demystify how journalism actually works. Okay, because I think then there's fewer journalists out in the community, and so when you have the President of the United States slandering hardworking journalists as enemy of the people, as fake news, we need to push back against that. And for 10 years, he's been doing this, and there hasn't been a sustained campaign to defend real newsrooms, right? And so,
There's been less vitriol from him recently, though, I think.
No, I disagree. Just at the time of this recording, 2 days before, he had a meeting with the South African president.
Oh, that was a ridiculous sense of white genocide and all the rest of that kind of thing that he was claiming.
Where he showed images that he said was white genocide in South Africa, and actually the image was from the Democratic Republic of Congo, by the way. So the President of the United States peddling deliberately false information, disinformation.
I think we're talking about two different things. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Yeah. I thought it was a travesty, but at the same time, he seems to be less vitriolic. For example, he used to go after women constantly, newswomen who would ask him questions.
No, but here, let me
talk about how nasty they were or something. He seems to be drawing back from that. And he used to go after CNN constantly, and he's not doing it as much either.
Michael, he went after Pete Alexander in NBC in the most vicious way in that same press conference. That's what I was referring to with the South African president, when he asked about the $400 million jet. He attacked him for a long time, and just calling him all kinds of names, threatening to open investigations into NBC. You have lawsuits against the Des Moines Register because of a poll he didn't like. You have all the attacks on CBS. I mean, he is going after. You have his attorney general threatening to investigate journalists. If they publish articles that don't accord with the U.S. administration agenda, we are in very dangerous territory. If anything, I think it's gotten worse. It's because it's gone beyond the rhetoric. Of course, in the first term, I think my former colleague Glenn Kessler documented, more than 300 times he referred to the fake news. So
I don't hear that as much. But what you're saying, of course, is all absolutely axiomatic. It's part of the picture of the world now and the way he operates. I'm just talking about the personal vitriolic attacks that you used to see all the time, CNN especially.
And I reported in all these places that we just talked about, right? The Gaza Strip, I covered wars. I covered the Iraq War. I covered all this stuff, and I am not being hyperbolic here, Michael, when I say that I never feared for my safety in any of those situations, like I fear for my students who go cover Trump rallies right now. There was a rally before the election, right before the election in November 2024, where President Trump said, I wouldn't care if someone shot through the fake news. Someone might have, if they get to me, they'd have to shoot through the fake news media, and I wouldn't care, something like that. I don't remember the exact quote. And I had a former student who was there, who wrote to me and told me what that was like being there. I mean, I have to teach my students now. I'm thinking about, what do I have to do? Like, what kind of training do I have to give them to protect them for this moment?
Well, we're in a period where people are fearful if they work in voting booths, for example. People are fearful if they work in newspapers. People are fearful on so many levels. And, it's it does go back to a kind of trickle-down theory with respect to what's coming out of the White House. Here's a question, though, that you hear probably a good deal. Susan Myers from San Jose. How will AI impact journalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, there's not a minute that goes by that I don't get something in my email about AI and journalism right now. And that's the kind of list I'm on. Look, let's start with something positive for a minute. This has been a little bit grim, right? And I think that, AI is going to be for good, credible journalists, it could be a useful tool. Say you have like a 500-page report or something like that. It can help you in an instant, save time in your reporting to like help you distill some of the main points, direct you to things that you may not find. If you just It will just help you as a reporting tool, right? In terms of doing data analysis, data visualization, story discovery, identifying blind spots in your reporting. But AI is not ready for writing right now. The problem of hallucinations when AI is underappreciated right now. I'm married to Professor Jeremy Bailenson here at Stanford, and just in the past week, he sent me 2 articles that just came up in his, Google News alerts that said that his virtual human interaction lab had conducted such and such study into vision or whatever, which it never done. Right now, people are gonna, and it's just extraordinary how much bunk is already emerging. And so I think we need to be very careful. What I tell people is this is why there's no way to know if you're just reading that person's thing that the virtual human interaction lab didn't conduct that study unless you go and know to look for it. But what you can do is say, who is this person who posted this thing that sent it to me, right? Who do I know this person? And that's why I think it's core to first line media hygiene is to read some credible fact-based news. If you don't like the New York Times and the Washington Post, then just read the AP and Reuters. They're not going to allow AI hallucinations into their copy.
Well, we've got a major problem, though, with social media as far as disinformation or what you call fake news or what we call fake news. And we've been tabloidized. And I've seen that constantly as a threat to accurate news reporting and to good journalism. And that's the world we are also in, I'm afraid, not to go back to the pessimism here, but it's certainly how I see things. And I just wonder, in fact, to what extent, we talk about Trump and the way he is baleful with the news and so forth, but he floods the news. I mean, every day there's things that come out of the Trump administration that the news has to cover, and it becomes overwhelming in many respects. It's just we're inundated with stuff.
Yeah, we truly are. And in the first term, it was maddening because he would start the news cycle, in the morning, early in the morning with a tweet. And then all day, that would be the story, right? Even though there were so many other things that people just chased it like the shiny new thing every day. And we are in that, except now there are so many consequential actions. It's not only him just tweeting out some racist or something untrue or whatever that you have to like talk all day about. What bothers me is a couple of things. First of all, people are not framing a lot of these things properly. Journalists in 2025 are still repeating lies and headlines that he says without qualifying it and saying he's saying this thing that's not true. They'll just directly quote him. And so very often he'll say a lie, like when he had these pictures up saying this is not even real. So the journalists need to work harder to fact check, but also they need to be able to chew gum and tap, whatever. What is it? Chew gum, rub your belly, tap your head at the same time. And
Jerry Ford talked about chewing gum and walking at the same time.
Chewing gum and walking, and I think I added all those other ones, right? But look at the why he's doing these things. Look at what is really possible, what's legal, what's not legal. So right now he's trying to the moves against Harvard, for example, right? This is it's insanity. And there needs to be a clearer presentation of what's happening when they do cover these things. I don't know that we have enough journalists to staff this term, like this coverage of this term. It is, like you said, an onslaught.
Also, I happen to hear the dialogue you did with Bret Stephens, and thank you again for helping me enlist Brad Stevens for this podcast.
Fantastic.
You indebted gratitude on that. But I was also struck by the discussion, the dialogue you had, because he was talking about opinion writing, and he was talking about disagreement and how important disagreement is. And that kind of journalism or that kind of reportage or coverage doesn't seem to be a part of the picture as much as it used to be. I mean, for example, NPR has just lost funding, and that's one of the things that NPR believed in. I'm not necessarily trying to make a case for NPR here. I actually heard from Bill O'Reilly's people who wanted me to defend NPR. I was in the process of traveling, and I couldn't go on Bill O'Reilly, which was probably maybe a blessing in disguise. But I'm just wondering your thoughts on this, because the idea was that what journalists are supposed to do is present both sides, agreement, disagreement. This is my position. Whether you're an opinion writer or not, you're supposed to see the whole multidimensional picture.
I mean, I don't know if I agree, Michael. I mean, when you're writing an opinion piece or you're an editorial, you're on the editorial page, you're making an argument, and I think it's on us to, read an array of really smart op-ed writers to figure out where we stand on issues.
I think that's what Stevens was saying, though. That's precisely what I mean.
I know, I agree with that, but I think that's separate from, when President Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine, and that led to, you'll know this history better than I will, but that, really then that led to this whole Rush Limbaugh, right-wing radio. You don't have to have both sides represented anymore. And we led to this polarization in our media that is crippling our country. So,
But that's precisely where we're at. That's my point.
That's where we're at. And so that's why I think it's my mission, and it should be all of our mission, to teach people to have a better news diet and know when they're spending time in the rabbit holes of the internet, like, what is worth my time? Who am I going to listen to? Just because there's an attack on expertise and authority right now also, it doesn't mean that there isn't expertise and authority. I was on a hike recently, and someone knew what I did. I teach at Stanford. Oh, I heard you teach at Stanford. So I always use these opportunities to ask people about their media diet. And I said, he's like, he says, the guy, like the hike leader said, I really like podcasts. So what do you listen to? He said, I listen to something called The Emerald, and I never hear of anything, right? I don't know. Okay, tell me about The Emerald. And he tells me about it. Okay, it's this thing about mystics and I don't know, wizards, and I don't know. So, but something about showing how myths undergird a lot of our contemporary technology, basically. And I said, who's the Michael Krasny of the podcast? Who's the host of the podcast? He says, Josh something. I said, Josh something. Well, who is Josh something? What is he? Is he a professor? And he didn't know. The guy didn't know. And it crystallized for me part of the problem, that people are just consuming what resonates with them, but without any evaluation of who is this person? Who's behind this thing that I'm reading? What's this? Who funds this thing? We need to be more discerning in how we consume media and teach people to do it.
Well, you've located one of the real central problems, as far as I've always seen. You don't have an informed citizenry to begin with. And when you don't have an informed citizenry and people are just taking the kind of stuff that you're talking about, what may be interesting and fun to listen to, but without backing it up or really investigating it to any degree, that's where democracy can fail.
I agree. And that's why I have trouble sleeping.
Any good sedatives that you want to recommend? Or
I take a little magnesium.
Magnesium helps. Yeah, yeah. Magnesium is good. Actually, I was reading something you were talking about with the interaction of technology and national security, and I was thinking of Hegseth and this whole scandal that happened with Yemen.
With Signal?
Yeah, with Signal. It's a bigger story in many ways. It was certainly dominating the news for a while, but like you say, the news can be dominated for a very ephemeral period, and then it's over, and something else dominates. But that's a scary story, really.
Absolutely scary. Think about how many years of hearings there were because Hillary Clinton kept that server in her house in Chappaqua. Years, right? And we already moved on from that. That he was sharing in the Signal group these plans, right? And not abiding by. Any other Pentagon officials would have been maybe charged, with careless a conveying or dissemination of classified information.
With Jeffrey Goldberg present, the editor of the Atlantic Monthly.
With Jeffrey Goldberg invited. I mean, it's such a clown show. I mean, honestly, it's just absurd. And I mean, none of the people who are in cabinet positions are qualified for these jobs. It's pretty incredible what's happening here. I don't know. It's not the topic of this conversation. You can have other people on to discuss that, but
well, let's get back to the uninformed citizenry, because it's always been of concern to me in any journalism I've done. You're talking about foreign affairs, you're talking about domestic affairs, things that should be vital in people's lives, and they just don't stay abreast. So many people don't, or they read social media, or they listen to podcasts. That's it, if anything.
Well, people, I mean, surveys do show, I mean, I have in my foreign correspondence class, I show the results of a pretty dismal study from National Geographic, I think did it, or it was a survey of what people know about the world. I mean, for sure, that's very low. But, it wasn't, I also start that class with a study from 1953, I think it is. And people didn't want to read about international news and current events then, right? So I think, I don't know, Michael, when I remember being at Middlebury College in the early 90s, like I'm about to have my 30th anniversary and reunion. And I remember when I didn't know something, it was very embarrassing to me. And I would, take the newspaper and open it up and try and read something about domestic, Social Security, whatever. I was always very embarrassed. And I think there's no shame right now in being uninformed. And it's what's upsetting is that people never say, I don't know. Let me think about that. Let me research. Let me talk to people. People are so strident and sure in their views right now, which goes back to the point you were making, I think, earlier when you brought up Bret Stephens. So I think we need to just nurture that and encourage that. And I think something that would help is, I disagree with you about NPR. I would have made that defense of NPR. I would have gone on that show. Because even if
I was in the middle of traveling for one thing.
No, I'm saying, but if they had called me, I would have gone, because I think, I don't have to tell you, a legend in public media. I mean, we could have conversations about where NPR errs, where they maybe use the wrong language, or maybe they need to reconsider things, but public media is part of the answer to all these problems. We can't rely on for-profit media to do the right thing, to bring those different kinds of voices to inform the public, especially in areas that are news deserts. So I'm deeply concerned about his attacks on NPR and the cuts in funding.
Well, especially when you think about the red states, they get NPR and they rely upon NPR and PBS, and it's a big loss. I mean, when I was thinking about actually if I would have been able to do this and not in the middle of traveling, I was thinking about that testimony that Fred Rogers gave many years ago when he actually made Senator Pastor cry because he was talking about, reaching children. I mean, originally PBS and NPR, I don't have to give their defense. I mean, I was there for decades, but, what they were all about was essentially educating the public. They were an educational, and still are, an educational institution which tried to at least aspire to high standards journalistically, not always reaching them and sometimes being more partisan and now being accused of being more woke than they used to be and all the rest of that. But nevertheless, as you say, it's public. It's not corporate.
Absolutely. And, our daughter's, for her 8th grade field trip to D.C., I chaperoned it because I wanted them to see a real newsroom and learn and see what that's like. And I took them to NPR. And they had this was not part of the regular trip. Like usually it's the Korean War Memorial in Arlington. That was all great. But they got to see and meet real journalists working really hard, including people like my former Washington Post colleague, Layla Fadel. And I want 8th graders across the country to have that opportunity, including from the red states. Because even, I don't like this term woke. I don't like it, Michael. It's,
well, it was stolen essentially from black people, and it's been,
I don't like it. I mean, it dismisses all the
vulgarized.
Yeah. I mean, let's have a conversation about language, about story selection, okay. But instead of cutting funding and it's really, really terrible.
Well, the sorts of things that you're talking about with educating youth and everything are vital, and it's really inspiring to hear the kind of things that you're involved in, and I hope you will be able to spread and proselytize and get more people involved in that. I'm also Thinking about all your experiences in Jerusalem, and this is a little off the beaten path, but I've always wanted to ask you, did you actually observe and see the so-called Jerusalem complex? It's real, isn't it? Where people go to Jerusalem and they get crazy, they become messianic, or they become so imbued with a sense of fervor and fanaticism that there's a pathological trajectory to that.
No, I never actually saw somebody that, those people would pop up. Well, I lived there for 7 years, but I never actually witnessed it myself, to be honest with you.
Well,
a lot of other things. I witnessed a lot of other things over those years.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, you've got to do the book on that. But it's a real syndrome. I mean, it's been.
Yes.
Also, I was thinking about in listening to you describe those opinion pieces of Bret Stephens. You used a splendid metaphor. You said you should have these columns should be like baking soda with a long shelf life. And I should just tell you, just anecdotally, that I was recently stopped at an airport. I had kidney stones and I was carrying baking soda. It was a complete pat down, by the way, literally. I mean,
really?
I've never even seen a pat down like that. And not only was it a complete pat down, but it was also scientifically, they had to look to see that it was not cocaine or something. I guess they thought I was, maybe a mule for El Chapo or something along those lines. Anyway, it's become a good anecdote. But what else is on your plate now?
Yeah, so we're wrapping up the quarter. I wanted to draw your attention, Michael, to two other events that I did subsequent to the Bret Stephens thing that may be of interest to your listeners as well, given the climate that we're in, because these are issues that I'm continuing to follow up on. One is an interview I did not too long ago with Marty Barron, the former editor of the Washington Post and the Boston Globe, called Lawsuits, Licenses, and Subpoenas, Who Will Defend the Free Press? And people can find that. It was our McClatchy Symposium at Stanford. You can find
Before
that
you
online.
go on, can I ask you to answer that? Who will defend the free press?
Yeah, I don't know that we reached any ground truth on that, but basically it's an interesting discussion of what's happened at the Washington Post under Jeff Bezos, and Collision of Power, Marty's book, is essential reading. But also, it's an exploration of just the kind of stress that newsrooms are under and the gap in the defense. That was why we put that together. I wanted to highlight that very few people. I think part of the people that need to defend the free press are our citizenry and our members of Congress. I mean, the Democrats too. I mean, very rarely. I mean, the Pope. Did you see the Pope? The new Pope, one of the first things he said was defending the free press. It was like unbelievable, right? And calling for the release of imprisoned journalists. I mean, that was amazing. And the other thing that's been on my mind that we just recently did a symposium about is online news content creators who we've mentioned in this talk are, dominating or shifting the media landscape. And so we did an event called The News Influencers. What can the legacy media learn from online content creators? And so thinking about how to have a more synergistic relationship with some of these people is something I'm thinking about. But for the most part, I'm really, again, working on trying to reach as many people as possible in this country with the key message, which is just be smarter information and news consumers. Don't just go down and read everything that your great uncle or your sister sends you and gets your heart rate up before you say, who is this person? What is this? Is this worth my time? I think if everybody does that and they tell their neighbor to do that, we can start to restore a more informed citizenry.
Can we go back to the Middle East and inform the citizenry through your usually very meticulous, to put it mildly, analysis? I mean, I'm trying to find some rays of hope in this. And when I think about what's going on in Gaza and what's going on just daily, it's very difficult. We did a podcast with Dennis Ross, who was a Mideast negotiator, and he was saying it's quite possible that we may actually come to some kind of resolution or agreement with Iran, because Iran is in desperate straits right now economically, and because essentially all their surrogates in the Middle East have been kind of neutralized by Israel, at least for the time being.
Well, Dennis is very rosy. That's it's good to
hear. He says there's a 50-50 chance that they can work
Really?
out. That's what he said.
I'll take those odds. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm really keeping an eye on the Syria thing because, that was, main Iranian thoroughfare to get to Hezbollah and South Lebanon. I mean, look, Iran deal, that's a game changer. That's it. That is happy days, right? Because then as part of that deal, well, what kind of deal though? If it's exclusively the nuclear about the nuclear deal, then not a game changer. If there's some I just don't see how there's like some kind of formal restoration of ties, rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran as when you have the current regime in Iran. I don't see that.
I also don't see how you can get at all those nuclear weapons transparently. Some of them are so deep in the ground, they don't even know where they are.
I mean, if the regime fell in Iran, that would be pretty incredible in terms of, no longer Iran being able to support Hezbollah, Hamas, and all their proxies. Yeah, the Houthis and everything. That would be a real game changer. And you would see sort of a cascade effect, I think, there. That would be positive. So I don't know. I mean, maybe look, President Trump's and was so critical of Biden anytime there were anything related to trying to do a nuclear deal with Iran, and now he's like open to talk. So I'm a little bit more skeptical about that. But the Syria thing is promising.
Is it promising in spite of the fact that the new head of state in Syria was in Al Qaeda and apparently was an Islamicist and still is? Maybe.
Yeah,
I mean, he's very close ties to Erdogan in Turkey.
There is this pick your poison thing, and I think that Israel for a long time was pretty happy with Bashar al-Assad because at least it was the devil you knew, and this is the devil you don't know as well. But I think that he's really distanced himself from a lot of his past associations, and so. But we don't want to be, all like rah-rah about it. I mean, sort of trust but verify, right? So we'll have to see. But it's a potential change at least, whereas under Bashar al-Assad, there was no chance of change.
Assad is in Russia now, and I keep thinking about what is Russia's role going to be in Syria, an ongoing role in the Middle East. It was in some ways central, and I'm also thinking about whether or not there's going to be, I know you are also, in addition to your expertise in the Middle East, very well versed in what's going on in foreign affairs. And I don't want to necessarily get us into different terrain here, but you can't help thinking about, is there going to be peace in the Middle East, and is there going to be peace between Russia and Ukraine?
I don't know. I'm still recovering, Michael, from that horrific Oval Office interaction.
The beating of Zelensky?
Yeah, of President Zelensky. And I think truly the most important foreign affairs story, if I had to pick one, is President Putin's relationship with President Trump. Because so much of what he seems to do, President Trump, aligns with President Putin's interests, both in this term and in the previous term. So I think that cannot be explored enough.
Have you read any of these conspiracies online about how Trump, in fact, it's interesting, he was supposedly taken over by Russian intelligence and given the name of Dmitry Krasnov. I'm not sure why Krasny means red in Russian, but this whole story is very convoluted. I'm not going to try to even crystallize it, but it has to do with Trump essentially being a tool of the Russians and of Putin, and that's what the Republicans have continued to call the Russian hoax.
The Russian hoax, but there are things that can be demonstrated. There have been books written about President Trump's reliance on Russia for funding when the banks wouldn't loan him money. There's a long history there that I think. But even regardless, even if you can't establish anything there and it's a hoax or whatever they want to call it, just pointing out or questioning why the president of the United States is taking positions that seem to benefit Putin, right? Why minimizing or misdeeds by the Russians. It's just that I don't know if there's enough of an inquiry there.
I just think about Helsinki. I always think about Helsinki, where Trump was talking only to Putin and he wouldn't allow any interpreters or anything else and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
He wants that kind of bond or that kind of intimacy with Putin. And Putin wants, for the most part, Crimea. He wants Ukraine back. Trump maybe now wants Greenland and Panama. I don't know. A lot of this has to do, we were talking before about Israel wanting the West Bank and Gaza. A lot of it has to do with territory, more land,
Yeah, that whole Greenland,
more minerals.
that we're going to take Greenland, Panama, and Canada story moved on too. It will resurface on a slow news day. But, I mean, he says a lot of things, and then people just sort of run with it. He's not going to be able to seize Greenland, Panama, and Canada, you know?
Well, you've just alluded to something that's very important. The era of noise, I think, is what it's called, isn't it?
That's what I call it.
Yeah. That's a good way to describe it.
It's the era of noise.
And just plugging up stories one after another. The attention span becomes all the more, especially with all the technology we have, becomes all the more diminished by all of this.
Which is why I find it very interesting that so many people want to listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast.
Well, I've explored that. Have you listened to much Rogan, by the way?
It's very hard for me.
Yeah, well, it's hard for me too, but I feel it's important to know what the reason is behind his success. And it has a lot to do with the fact that he's talking about things that people are fascinated by. I mean, whether it's extraterrestrials or whether it's, we don't want to get into Joe Rogan and what he does, but it's amazing to me. He only has a couple of producers and he keeps coming up with these stories, lost continents, and I mean, things that, have to do with the old Ripley, believe it or not type of stuff. It's fascinating to people. They're drawn in and they're held in.
It's okay. It's just people should realize what it is. It's entertainment,
Well, that's what too much journalism's become, hasn't it?
Well, he wouldn't call himself a journalist, right? Even though people see him. But the problem is he's a very trusted, I think he's the most important person in media right now. So I think, yes, we do have to study and learn from what he does. I mean, in terms of influence.
Stephen A. Smith says, I'd like to be, and Trump said he has charisma, and he said he maybe wants to run for president one day. He said, really what I want to be is Joe Rogan. I want to have that influence over people that Joe Rogan has, especially over young men.
Yeah, well, good luck, Stephen A. Smith.
Well, he's got a lot of influence, though. I mean, Smith does now because of the sports world that he has very central in. And yet at the same time, Rogan is a stand-up comic. That's his background. That's the background of many of these iconic figures. I mean, whether it's Stephen Colbert or Jon Stewart, they started out as stand-up comics, and that's what they are. And I think Trump would like to have been a stand-up comic. Unfortunately, he gets humor at the expense of other people for the most part.
I've never laughed at any of his jokes.
Well, he supposedly never laughs and has no sense of humor, but Bill Maher has said otherwise from having his dinner with our president. So journalism can be saved, will be saved.
Oh, yeah. You don't think journalism's going to be saved? Well, we have to save it. What does that even mean? We have to Let me tell you something. I am very blessed that I get to teach journalism at Stanford University, and I get to be every day with young, eager journalists. Right after this podcast, I'm going to have lunch with 4 students. We're going to talk about a Berlin Diary, William Shire's diary from when he covered the rise of Nazi Germany. And then I'm going into an edit with a master's thesis about housing in the peninsula with one of my star master students who's going to go on and be a journalist. And I get to train the next generation of fact-based, amazing journalists to go into the world because we need them to continue to do accountability reporting. And there's still a lot of young people who want to do it. And so that's what keeps me positive.
And what you alluded to before about the threat sometimes that comes to doing good, credible journalism, hard, factual-based journalism, the threats are there. The menaces are there.
They're there, but unfortunately, if you're a lawyer, there are threats now. If you work in a university, there are threats now. If you work in a polling, like you mentioned, a polling station, there are threats. I mean, where are you going to go that there's not threats right now? So I have to train people to tune out a lot of the online noise, which is where the predominant threats really come, the sort of doxing, the digital attacks, those kinds of attacks. And everybody, just go do good work. That's what I train them to do.
Go do good work. There's an axiom for us to really take to heart. Let me first of all thank all of you who joined us for this episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny and all who will be joining us on Apple, Spotify, or on our website at graymatter.show. And if you aren't yet a member of the podcast, I invite you to join by going to the website at graymatter.show, where you can also find previous episodes of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny. Also invite you to email me with any reactions, thoughts, or recommendations, mkrasny@graymatter.show, and that's Gray with an E. Want to thank our indefatigable Gray Matter with Michael Krasny team, Alex, Shannon, Chad, Kevin, Jeff, and Colleen. And a special thanks to this week's guest, Stanford professor, author, and one of our finest journalists, Janine Zacharia. Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Michael.
I'm Michael Krasny.
Bandwidth for Gray Matter is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.